Hello, everyone, and thanks for joining us on the Week in Review. I'm Amanda Vinicky. Paris Schutz has the evening off. President Joe Biden's opening salvo in his race for re-election seeks to lay bare what's at stake.
The topic of my speech today is deadly serious, and I think it needs to be made at the outset of this campaign.
We're going to walk down to the Capitol.
While Donald Trump's role in the January 6th riots leads voters to challenge whether he can be on the Illinois ballot.
We are supporting our unhoused. We are working to right the wrongs of the past.
Another new legal challenge seeks to remove a ballot question that would raise a tax on high-end real estate sales, Mayor Brandon Johnson's solution for helping the homeless. Meanwhile, Illinois' once most powerful politician wins a temporary reprieve from going on the stand for alleged corruption. And droves of migrants increase pressure, not just on Chicago, but also on the suburbs. And now to our Week in Review panel. Joining us are Mitchell Armentrout of the Chicago Sun-Times. Welcome for your first appearance here. Also, Laura Rodriguez-Presa from the Chicago Tribune, Becky Vivi from Chalk Beat Chicago, and from Block Club Chicago, Quinn Myers. Now let's get right to it and actually begin with, we're just talking hours after President Biden's big speech, and that is, it was pointedly given in Valley Forge, where George Washington commanded revolutionary troops. And this was a speech purposely given the day before the infamous and historic attack on the U.S. Capitol 3 years ago on January 6th.
A day forever shared in our memory because it was on that day that we nearly lost America, lost it all. Today, we're here to answer the most important of questions. Is democracy still America's sacred cause?
I'm going to pose that question to you, Quinn. He poses a huge question. Is democracy still sacred in the United States of America? Is this just a candidate trying to make a case for re-election, or is there something deeper and a more existential point?
Probably a little bit of both. I think Joe Biden probably firmly believes that democracy is at stake in this election, but it's also his pitch to voters, and it's an anti-Trump pitch, right? He's saying, hey, vote for me to save the union. And it's, of course, January 5th, as you mentioned, almost 3 years to the day of the insurrection. So I think it is notably a campaign tactic, and one that certainly worked for Joe Biden in 2020. We'll see if it works in 2024.
All right, Laura, does this speech matter? First of all, not in prime time. I don't know how many folks watched it. And then even if a lot of people did, given the polarization that we see in the country, does it make any difference to change folks' minds?
I mean, as of now, we've seen the polls, and Trump has been leading the polls. So I don't know that it will make a big difference, but I do think, as Quinn mentioned, it's a campaign move, right? It's something that he needed to do to remind people that this happened, as a way to also, still let them know that Trump is most likely going to be on the ballot as well.
So how are you covering this race? Trump is unlike any other in so many ways, least of all the involvement, and we'll get a little more to the Illinois situation when it comes to the insurrection, but further facing numerous court cases. How are you covering this as a political journalist, Mitch?
You know, in Chicago, obviously, we're in a deeply blue state and city. So it can be easy for us to forget in Chicago that, both Joe Biden and Donald Trump, they're taking January 6th, and one is trying to use it to illustrate the absolute worst that we can see for democracy in America, and the other is trying to use that as, an example of folks seizing democracy themselves. I think it's pretty clear that, at least a lot of the folks who were there that day saw it as an insurrection, and I think that's what a lot of voters in Chicago, in Illinois, at least in the metro area, certainly seem to get behind, that we've seen in polling. As far as covering it here, I think it's just a matter of keeping it all in context.
Keeping it all in context, we will try to do that here, including with bringing it home to what this means here in Illinois, because that attack on the Capitol could really impact the presidential race in a really direct fashion by perhaps keeping Trump off of the ballot completely in 18 states now, including Illinois, where a group of voters have filed suit saying that a 14th, or they're not filed suit, seeking action from the Board of Elections to say that because of the 14th Amendment, anybody that was involved in an insurrection, including President Trump, should be barred from serving. So, Becky, where does this go?
Well, it sounds like the Supreme Court has agreed to take up the issue in Colorado's case. And so I think whatever they end up deciding would certainly set precedent across, I would think, all the other states that are now considering this question, including Illinois, as we saw this week, people challenging whether or not his name should appear on the ballot here. But I think we'll all have to kind of watch and see what the Supreme Court says in that Colorado case.
Quinn, what position does this put the Supreme Court in when we already have historically low approval ratings for justices?
Well, I mean, tough luck. This is their job to, administer and rule on the toughest questions, and that is what they're set up to do. So I think it's kind of a consensus. People already feel like it's a done deal that they're going to let Trump on the ballot and they're going to overturn what happened in Colorado and the challenges that are popping in other states. I think that's a fair assessment based on the makeup of the court and how they've ruled in the past term. But we'll see. Maybe not.
Is this an exercise? Again, we are waiting for a decision, but is this an exercise in futility then, or is this something that, again, could maybe change voters' minds as we're trying to weigh out how this all...
I don't think it's going to change voters' minds. I think the bigger things at play are the indictments Trump is facing. And, if he is convicted in any of those, then we're going to see a whole slew of additional court challenges, whether he is fit to, run for president.
Really tight timeline there. Already very busy as a candidate. Can't imagine having to keep up with all those court dates. Somebody else that is going to be in court, although not as quickly as he had expected. Once powerful man with legal problems. We're talking about a judge ruling in former Illinois House Speaker Michael Madigan's bribery trial, postponing it by about 6 months. Was supposed to start in April and instead going to be in October. So, Mitch, this is again due to the U.S. Supreme Court. What are the justices going to be weighing in this case?
Yeah, very busy docket for the Supreme Court, like you mentioned. So the Supreme Court justices are also weighing a case out of Portage, Indiana, involving a former mayor who was convicted of bribery. And essentially the justices are now looking at what actually constitutes bribery, and how much of a concrete quid pro quo does there have to be to secure a conviction. And at this point, it doesn't have to be you give me this and I'll give you that. There's a lot more leeway within the law that federal prosecutors have really utilized to take down a lot of figures in Illinois over the last couple of years at Burke, and they're hoping to do the same with Michael Madigan. So that decision can really have a huge impact, not only on Ed Burke's conviction and the convictions of other folks, but it could have an impact on whether Madigan even ends up going to trial. I think we will. I think I'm no lawyer, but we'll see.
We're journalists, everybody. Not. I'm sorry, I interrupted you. Though you said you're not a lawyer, but.
But it seems pretty cut and dried that when it comes to bribery, it doesn't have to be an exact tit for tat. There is some leeway there.
But in the meantime, this is good news for Michael Madigan. An extra 6 months of he doesn't have to face trial at least. And
being at home, family, your legal team being able to shore up any defenses.
Yeah, it's a mini win for Madigan here.
He's had a lot of those in his day before this big fall, and we'll see. He's also, I think, 81 years old right now, so wondering what that does for things. You mentioned Ed Burke, so let's go with that, and I'll go actually back to you, Mitch, because you had a story today about how the convicted former alderman, he's due for some big payouts with his city pension. This, even though what he was found guilty of has to do with his holding office. So how does that work?
So in Illinois, politicians or public officials who are convicted of a crime related to their office under state law they can't collect their pension benefits. But they are, of course, entitled to be refunded any dollars that they've contributed to that account during their career. And Ed Burke was obviously, he was the alderman for 54 years in the 14th Ward. And actually going through some of his older pension records, he actually started working as a 17-year-old working in parks. So he actually started
He's been paying basically into the pension fund since he was a teenager.
Exactly, since 1961. So that comes out to about, including interest, he's looking at a one-time payment of more than $500,000. But perhaps more egregious than that, or I shouldn't call it egregious, a little jaw-dropping, I would say, is that a loophole in state campaign financing law allows politicians of a certain age to pay themselves out of their own political campaign funds.
Essentially do whatever they want with the money. There's regulations now on how it can be used, but if he has a campaign fund, he can do what with it?
Exactly. So they reformed the law back in 1998 to sort of bridge that, pretty glaring hole in the law. But the lawmakers back then gave themselves an out to pay themselves out as much as they had in their account as of the middle of 1998. For Ed Burke, that's about $2.5 million that he'll be able to pay himself.
Pay himself, buy a car, pay perhaps legal fees, do whatever he wants with.
Anything he wants.
I think egregious might be an appropriate word.
$2.5 million. Whew, okay. Burke is set to learn at his sentencing in June how long he's going to be going to prison for. One story not going away, however, we're going to go to you, Laura, and that is the influx of migrants. Texas, you have bus companies as well, even private plane charter companies, essentially really skirting Chicago's attempts to block buses, at least at certain times, and instead taking migrants and dropping them off in other communities that are now implementing drop-off restrictions of their own. So how widespread is this effect?
Yeah, well, we've seen just all of the cities around us. That's Kaki Wheaten, and if you guys can remind me which other ones, but we've seen Oak Park. We pretty much any surrounding city in Chicago has now implemented those limits into how buses arrive, pretty much similar to what Chicago did, and so the bus drivers are dropping them off in random stations or random even gas stations, I believe.
The plane truck taking folks to Rockford.
Right. And so the cities are adopting different policies to pretty much discourage migrants from arriving there, whether it be not only limiting and imposing fees to bus drivers, but also adopting a non-sanctuary city ordinance almost that they call it.
Do you see those as two separate things? Is it because there are those who say that this is the restrictions are meant to force better communication and coordination? Is that the same, however, as?
No, I think that, well, first of all, I think that all of the efforts by city, or by cities, I should say, are all aimed to Texan officials and people that are leading the efforts to send migrants here. Migrants have no idea where they're going, who's welcoming them or not welcoming them, or where they're landing. All they know is that they're being taken somewhere. So I don't know that, like the non-sanctuary city messaging, it's pretty much just discouraging people from going there, and that means we're not gonna give you help, essentially, right? But how are they sending that message to the migrants? I don't know that that's very clear. I don't even know that the migrants understand what that means, right? I don't think that politics are not a priority for them, and they definitely don't understand anything that's happening in our cities around us. So,
Becky, is there any sign that this is helping to improve coordination, or is this just causing more problems?
No, I would say that it appears to me that it's sort of like a bit of, to Laura's point, like the officials talking past one another, and then the people on the ground trying to, be humane to one another. I mean, I think what you see is migrants landing somewhere, and a lot of individuals and volunteers and people with good hearts and groups trying to piece together solutions for them. But there's a whole separate conversation happening above the folks on the ground that I would say is not improving. It's very much this talking past one another.
I think what it's exposing is just the lack of a centralized plan, whether it be from the state or the federal government. I don't know if
or both.
Or both,
Yeah, I think federal government here, it needs to step up because it's beyond, now it's beyond just, the Pritzker and Johnson. It's now we have all the cities kind of like against each other. So.
Right.
When you saw the mayors in New York and Chicago and was it Denver?
Yes.
That all put out a joint statement essentially saying, "Hey, federal government,
That's
like
helped.
we need you to actually come in and help, be the coordinator, the convener here to help this, and also provide resources and financing."
Going back to elections coming up, it's essentially Republican state against a Democratic state, and this is using the people, right? Now, again, I think that it's very important to mention that migrants have a whole different mindset of why they're coming here and where they're going. So I think that the Republican state is taking advantage of what that means and using it against the Democrats, and then Democrats are no longer able to respond. I don't want to say properly, but in a way to handle all of the amount of people that are coming here. It's over 30,000 people now in Chicago, but we don't know anymore, right? That definitely is undercounted.
Well,
we don't know where they're getting
in some ways,
anymore.
like to that point, I do think there's a point at which our Democratic mayor, our Democratic governor, and our Democratic president in an election year with a Democratic National Convention about to happen in our city next summer, there is some incentive, I would hope or think that they would want to get on the same page.
Outside of humanitarian reasons, for political ones.
Well, for political ones, yeah. I mean, obviously, first and foremost for humanitarian reasons, but they are incentivized further due to that, I think, hanging over their head.
Do we see any movement there, though? I mean,
it's only January 5th, but I mean, we'll see.
I don't know. 6 months flies by. Let me
Yes.
tell you, from a personal point of view there. But Quinn, I mean, the mayor was supposed to have met with members of Illinois' congressional delegation. We also see continued polarization in Washington as a federal shutdown could be looming, budget impasse, and part of that, of course, the immigration situation. So
it's a perfect storm. I mean, we are in an election year, and it's hard to imagine Republicans in D.C. wanting to toss a bone to Chicago here. I do think the mayor has been making the case. I mean, he's been making the case since he was elected that the federal government needs to step up, and he's kind of been on national media in the past week or two making that case. So I think the message has been received. It's a matter of political will at levels that go far beyond our city and state.
Immigration hasn't been a priority in presidential elections in the past. For many, we've been through several precedents and it hasn't been a priority, and it certainly has been an issue, an ongoing issue. And I think that this might be the chance for officials to step it up and put it back on the agenda.
If there is any sort of desire to come together, which I'm not sure we've seen a lot of that. Can either of you give us an update on what is going on in the ground here in Chicago, where the state is moving forward with an intake center we heard about months ago, as well as Little Village, and a shelter set to open there?
They're set to open a shelter later this month at a former CVS in Little Village. That's where some of the migrants that are currently staying at hotels will be transferred over. Garda World, which was actually the company that was supposed to manage the winterized tent in Brighton Park that was shut down, will be staffing that shelter.
Is that going to help, though? I mean, if you're moving migrants from one place to another as more are coming in, is this going to make a dent?
I think that they just need more shelters. I mean, right now there is about, I believe, more than 300 people waiting at O'Hare. We have a few at the 12th District Police Station. And there's certainly more coming into the city. So I don't know that it's going to help. I do know, though, that the state has opened up hotels again, which is another thing that different cities have also tackled, which is adding a tax into long-term stays in hotels to avoid the long-term stays.
At the same time, is the city going to keep standing up shelters? So they've stood up 27. The state is putting this one in Little Village, 28. Is the city just going to keep building more and more shelters? I think they're going to start cutting it off at some point.
I think so.
Go ahead.
Yeah, well, they have the limit too. We have to remember that
60-day limit.
So people, we're getting close to that.
And if I may add to this, I did write a story before I left on vacation talking about what this could mean for the amount of people without homes, which is pretty much falling into homelessness and creating their own their own homes in vacant land, as they do in Latin America, which is something that they've told me that they're not afraid to do here.
And the first 60 days lapses in about 12, 2 weeks.
coming up.
Yeah.
And
so not
even
too
as
long.
we have, of course, now this new lawsuit. So, Mitch, to you, there's a lawsuit regarding the Bring Chicago Home ordinance, which is supposed to raise money to cure issues regarding homelessness. Does this have any sort of legs?
You know, it's kind of interesting just how these issues sort of almost go hand in hand in some ways. You know, homelessness is obviously, it's been an entrenched issue in Chicago and so many other major cities for generations. And you know, this lawsuit could present sort of another roadblock to Brandon Johnson's progressive agenda so far. When it came to expanding paid leave, guaranteed paid leave for all workers, that passed City Council, just like this ballot referendum item. But you know, now they've gone back, and that plan, the paid leave plan, is going to be delayed by at least a few months. We'll see how successful some of the landlords are with this lawsuit. But you know, it's just kind of another impediment that Johnson's running into at this point.
And yet another impediment for Johnson. Let's touch briefly. We've got about 4 minutes left on the Chicago police officers. An issue with those who are really in serious trouble, with an arbiter saying that the city council made a real big mistake and a mess, really took alderpersons to task by trying to go around the arbitrator's ruling that these officers don't have to go through an arbitrator, or can go through an arbitrator, with the city council saying, no, we want you to have to go before the police board and have this be open. Right. So given the mayor's progressive promises, is there any way around this?
Well, it's just to give you a little bit of context, because it is a lot of insider baseball. You know, the most serious police disciplinary cases, I believe it's termination or suspension longer than a year, go in front of the public police board, where officers can contest that ruling. Through the latest city contract with the Fraternal Order of Police, an independent arbitrator has ruled that police officers should have the right to choose closed-door arbitration, similar to other public unions. And the city and many other people are fighting that ruling. They even split the police contract vote in a pretty dramatic way last month. Right. But you know, the arbitrator came back today and said it is state law, and the city
constitutional amendment holding up union rights.
And the city council violated state law, and now they've made their point, and he's urging them to once again vote.
So what's the mayor going to do, though? Because he's ran on this progressive platform.
Good question, but I think the mayor and his allies will continue to vote it down. I think it is, you know, they argue that it is a vital part of police oversight and accountability, the police board, to have these hearings public. And yes, it may set up a very prolonged legal battle, but I do think
costly one too,
I do think that progressives will go to bat for this one.
We've got about 2 minutes left, Becky. I want to make sure to get to you, because the Board of Ed is really weighing in hard, trying to perhaps move away from a system of school choice, also move away from having police officers in schools, but they say they want public input. Is this truly an opportunity for that, or merely an exercise in PR?
Well, they do say that they are going to be having some meetings about the district's next strategic plan. Those meetings haven't been exactly announced yet, but they will be in February. And I will say this board, this 7-member appointed board appointed by Mayor Brandon Johnson, who has strong feelings about the school system and had
former teacher, of course,
former teacher,
CTU
union
member,
organizer and teacher. You know, this is their final year, really, before they're replaced by a 21-member hybrid board and eventually a fully elected board, to essentially make some new policies. And so they are signaling, though they haven't actually changed the policies yet, they are signaling some of their intent, including that they would end the contract with the police department for officers, CPD officers in schools. There still might be security officers. And they've also signaled that they want to focus more on neighborhood schools and less on charters and selective and magnet schools. But we don't know yet what shape that would take. But I will say it's going to be an eventful 2024 for, I think, the school board and the school system, as it shifts governance from being under mayoral control to being under an elected or hybrid elected board.
And we've got about 30 seconds left, so I'm going to end here with COVID, because it is back, it is bad, as is the flu, RSV. Doctors encouraging folks to mask up. So I am curious, some hospitals are re-implementing mask requirements. Anybody have information on why not all hospitals at this point?
I think there's just no appetite for it. I think you talk to the experts who are dealing with this on a daily basis, and there's just fatigue when it comes to even hearing about the news. So, regardless, it's just a matter of trying to get more folks to take it seriously. And honestly, that's the challenge that health professionals have been facing for almost 4 years now. So.
Yes, about a 13% rate of vaccination, I believe, in the city of Chicago on that COVID shot. So with that, we are out of time. Our thanks very much to our panel, and that includes Becky Vivi, Mitchell Armentrout, Laura Rodriguez-Presa, and Quinn Myers. We are back to wrap things up right after this.
Chicago Tonight is made possible in part by Alexandra and John Nichols, the Polk Brothers Foundation, and the support of these donors. Tonight's presentation of Chicago Tonight, Week in Review, is made possible in part by Ann and Rich Carr and the Mollenhauer Progressive Philanthropic Fund in honor of Ida Mollenhauer, supporting quality journalism.
And that's our show for this Friday night. Don't forget, you can get the Chicago Tonight and the Week in Review streamed on Facebook, YouTube, also our website. That's WTTW.com/news. And now for the Week in Review, I'm Amanda Vinicky. Thank you for watching. Stay healthy and safe and have a great weekend, especially perhaps those of you who ride the Skokie Swift, or I've been calling it the Skokie Stall. It is finally back in the yellow line after 7 weeks.
Yeah.
Quinn, do you think that this creates any sort of lasting distrust in the CTA?
I mean, you mentioned it. If this was the blue line, it would have been a couple of days. I think, right? I don't think
have let it
this
linger.
is kind of like a low ridership. It's way up on the far north side. So I don't know if a blue line or pink line would be down for 7 weeks. I think people would be.
Closed captioning is made possible by Robert A. Clifford and Clifford Law Offices, a personal injury law firm committed to giving back to the community through law and philanthropy.